Hey all, I'm Kel Kidman. Welcome to Breaking on the Daily, where today we have the Arizona legislator closing down for a week because of coronavirus. A Michigan man had the front of his house exploded, potentially because of his political affiliations, and China is now blaming Australia for COVID. So all that and a bit more, we're just going to begin with the Arizona legislator, as we just stated, is closing down for a week after Giuliani tests positive for coronavirus. Now, is this the actual reason they're closing down? No. They're just trying to use it as an excuse to not actually do anything. The Speaker of the House is a notorious rhino. I mean, it's just kind of ridiculous. Arizona has been rife with rhinos for such a long time, and they're still not completely out. They're certainly in a better place than they used to be, with Kelly Ward now running their state GOP, but, we're still kind of there. But, the precipice of this story is that Giuliani tested positive for coronavirus, and in all likelihood, he'll be fine. I mean, that's all that needs to be said. As far as we understand, right now, he's not even very sick, and it doesn't seem to be affecting him all that much. But the silly thing about this is that Giuliani tested negative for coronavirus twice, pretty much immediately preceding the Arizona hearing that supposedly created the precipice for this closing, and only tested positive for coronavirus 48 hours after this whole hearing happened. It's just such a silly excuse, and it's just more and more obvious that there are so many Republicans that just do not care about actually fighting for something that is plainly obvious. And the fact that there is a lot of screwy things going on with this election. A lot of statistical anomalies that cannot be explained, or at least have not been explained by anyone without just hand-waving it away as a nothing. I mean, take, for example, the fact that no president before ever in history has gained votes between their original election and their midterm and lost, except for Donald Trump. I mean, just that alone is very, very strange. Impossible? Well, no, of course not. There's many, many more people who live in the country than normally vote in elections, so obviously, if just a whole lot of people vote, everyone can gain votes, and also Donald Trump can lose. But it's extremely unlikely, even in this election, where we did have extremely high turnout in specific places. Now, it's worth it to mention that those specific places are exactly the places in which there was a lot of screwy stuff going on. Certain districts in Michigan, certain places in Arizona, Georgia, and all these sorts of places that are having these problems and are the ones at issue right now. That seems to be what it's very strange, and there's many, many more things on that sort of level that are happening right now. And there's a lot more statistical data that just keeps coming out that becomes more and more suspicious as time goes on. Along with all the sorts of things that we're seeing, the ballots being taken out from under the tables and counted without anyone there. Obviously, that's a very huge problem. Even if there was nothing, because here's the thing. I've heard a lot of people say, well, there was nothing done wrong there because, they counted everything fine. They didn't actually flip any ballots. They didn't put in multiple. And you know what? That's not true. Because the very fact that they were alone for an hour handling ballots without any observers there, without any partisan observers there, to be clear, is already a problem. It's already a violation of election law, and everything that was counted in that time frame should obviously be removed. But people have vehemently argued against that because they don't actually care about election integrity. They care about the appearance of election integrity. And this is a point that I've been making for a very long time. People care much, much more about appearances of certain things than they really do about what is actually going on. And that's one of the biggest problems in our political system at the moment. Our politicians specifically are almost obsessed with the idea that we are all these sorts of pomp and circumstance, all of these sorts of things that aren't important, aren't materially necessary to our governance, but they still do, and they find even more important than actually following the Constitution because of the appearance of it. Things like the State of the Union address, things like the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and things like the media calling the presidential candidates the presidential winner. All of these sorts of things are considered sacred cows for many of the elite. And this is what has been happening over many decades. It's really been a thing since FDR, and it's certainly intensified over the years, but I would say that's where it started, either with him or with Teddy Roosevelt. It's around that sort of, the progressive era, that sort of time, is where we're talking, with this sort of pomp and circumstance becoming primary in American politics. It's just such a silly thing. And it really has ruined a whole lot of stuff. It has made many, many bad things happen. Because you have to... so many things have just messed up. And a good example of, say the legislator being lazy, is the Democrat-run House will be the laziest Congress in history next year, according to Congressman Kevin McCarthy. And the precipice of this statement is that next year, the Congress, the House of Representatives, is only going to meet for 101 days out of the 365 days of the year. That is completely ridiculous. This year, they only met for, I think it was 127 days. Or 134, sorry. 134 days out of the year. They were working less this year than they were last year in a time of a pandemic, when ostensibly they should be working more. Or at least as much, as Kevin McCarthy said. He said that pretty much the exact same thing. I accidentally paraphrased him. But really, is it acceptable that the House of Representatives are only working about 4 days out of the week? I mean, they're only working for about half the year. Is that acceptable? And now even less? Now we're talking about 3 days, 2.5 days out of the week? How ridiculous could you possibly be? These guys should be working 6 days a week, at least. I mean, I get it. We want to have breaks and all that sort of stuff. But they should be working just as hard as any other American. And throughout this whole thing, many Americans have been working 6 day weeks or 7 day weeks. And the Congress just gets to do 4 day weeks, 3 day weeks? Completely ridiculous. The idea that our elected politicians can just sit around and be lazy is one of the most insipid ideas that has ever infected our body politic, and it is really one of the most disgusting. So it really has just infected, particularly the Congress, though it has affected other branches as well. It's just such a silly thing. It is just, man, it really boils my blood to see how lazy the legislator is, and how little it does, how little it cares about its own power, about its own importance in our in our governmental system. It shows just how much Nancy Pelosi doesn't care about our Constitution, because the Congress is ostensibly supposed to be the most powerful branch of government, rather than the weakest, which it has become over the years. It's just, man. And it certainly doesn't help the credibility of the Congress when you have people like Ilhan Omar and her husband getting a $500,000 coronavirus bailout, while her campaign, Ilhan Omar's campaign, was giving them millions. So, for those who don't know about the whole Ilhan Omar and her terrible, terrible, terrible things that she's done, she's been giving money to her now husband, used to be lover, company for years, and has been essentially using it to money launder all of that money from her campaign, which are essentially public donations, into her own coffers. And she's been doing this for years. She's been doing it for years now that she's been in Congress for years. She's been doing this ever since she's gotten into Congress, if not even a bit more. And that's just on top of all of the sort of other things she's done, like immigration fraud and all that sort of stuff that she's allegedly done. Sorry, I have to say allegedly because I don't want to get sued, but it's allegedly. But it is now known that that firm that her husband owns and that she was giving millions to also got $500,000 from coronavirus relief. As if it wasn't clear that the, $1 trillion that we spent in the original coronavirus relief bill was just a huge bailout for a bunch of well-connected, elites and all those sorts of people, because that's what always happens with government spending. And I don't want to hear this crap from these people on the left who are like, well, it's just the corruption in government, and we just need to get rid of that corruption. Dude, when has that ever happened? I mean, I will believe you, and I will believe that government corruption in spending, especially big spending like this, can be removed when I see it happen once. All I need is one example, and for that I have never seen, particularly in a large scale country. I mean, if we're talking about what is essentially a tribe, a city-state, something very small, yeah, I could see that happening because it's such a small area that you could potentially do that. But if that's impossible to scale up, especially to a country with 300 million people and so many people in government. We have, 1 million people in government? A few million? The idea that we can keep all of those people from being uncorruptible, the idea that none of those people are corrupt, is just utterly ridiculous. It can't happen. It can't happen. You have such a large scale of people that it just isn't possible. It would be surprising if it was, because there's just too many people there. There's so many people there. It wouldn't be a surprise if there were a few schizophrenics in there for all it's worth, because it's just statistically likely at that point, because you have such a large sample. That's just what ends up happening when you're dealing with large groups of people. So the idea that we can just get rid of the corruption is just a fantasy land. It doesn't happen. It never has. Not in a large economy. Not in a large country. It's never happened in a large country. You can't get rid of corruption. And in a small country, it's even debatably worse, because what you're dealing with is a very insular community in which you might have a scenario in which there's one family that's super duper powerful and no one else can even compete, because the one super duper powerful family essentially acts as a oligarchy or a dictatorship over the rest of the serfs. and that's just kind of what ends up happening. I mean, to be clear, I'm not saying that, bigger countries or smaller countries are inherently better or worse than each other. It's simply that we cannot deny the fact that corruption is inherent to government. It just is. It's why you need to limit it as much as possible, not through, any sort of, auditing measures or that sort of thing, but by simply limiting the power of government and preventing it from doing these sorts of things. That's what the founders did. That was their entire goal, and to localize things so that things would be less centralized and less prone to large-scale corruption, and rather you would have more small-scale corruption that could be more easily dealt with. And anyway, on to our next headline story. Michigan man says his support for Trump may have caused his home to be targeted with explosives. Now, we know his home was targeted with explosives because we have it on video. We saw what I think is a firework, or at least it may have been a modified firework, be thrown into his house through a window. And if you look at the damage, and I'm going to show it in just a minute, it is really insane. And you know what? I'm going to show it, and it just, in editing, I'm going to put it right here. Let's go.
Smoke was filling the house. I went up, told her to get out of the house, grab the dog, get out of the house.
That's what this homeowner, who we are not identifying for safety reasons, says he experienced early Saturday morning after hearing not one, but 2 loud booms. This is video from his neighbor's house down the street showing the explosions.
An explosion went off, and I kind of sounded like a transformer, I guess, from a power line. And then another explosion went off, and it shook the house.
Now, he showed us the aftermath of the damage inside his living room.
And when we came outside, we noticed the whole window, and it was completely blown out, smoke coming out. I didn't know if the house was on fire or what was going on. And I seen a truck run, racing down the road. When the police showed up, they went in. Luckily, it didn't catch fire, but the actual implosion of the mortar did some serious damage.
So yeah, that video is kind of insane. you have a lot of Oh man. So we at least know this isn't a hoax. I mean, obviously, this guy's house was targeted with explosives, and man, that crater was pretty crazy, right? Like, jeez, that was a whole 6 inches, and like just a huge black hole in the floor. I mean, luckily it didn't do much else other than that in the window. But man, this guy's super unlucky, and he says that he it might be a case of political targeting, because he's very open about his Trump support, and has like a flag outside his door or whatever, and it has his signs up and all that sort of stuff. And maybe I mean, I'm not going to say that's necessarily the case, because, well, we don't know. For all we know, the guy's crazy, and really it's a coin flip at that point. I really do think it's probably a coin flip between politically motivated and he's just kind of crazy. It's hard to tell because we don't have much information other than that, yeah, this happened. 2, the guy was in a truck. Okay. And the guy was wearing a hood when he did it. We do have a picture of him, of the suspect, of the person who probably did it. But other than that, we don't have much information. It's being investigated by the police, and there is a reward for giving any information. So, there's that sort of thing. This is an interesting story, and if there's an update, I'm going to update you guys all here, because I am interested to see where the story goes. If it is an example of political targeting, this is a really, really bad story. It's really bad. I mean, it's never good to see in a society where there's people who are just okay with targeting their political enemies. And not in a way like, rhetorically targeting them or, politically targeting them, but actually physically targeting them with explosives. That's not okay. And that's not something we want to see, obviously. It's just not something that is good for anyone. But anyway, on to our next story. China has now suggested the coronavirus may have originated overseas and arrived in Wuhan via frozen food, including Australian steak. Now, this is like the 3rd story from China about where the coronavirus came from that wasn't them. I mean, this is just the latest in these stories, because remember back, I think it was a month ago, not very long ago, where they blamed Italy for this, and then they blamed, like, Africa. Like, they have blamed every other they're going to blame every other country. I mean, originally they blamed the U.S. Army. I mean, you talk about, like, conspiracy theories, how people are saying, well, it was a biologically engineered disease in Wuhan that was biologically engineered and got out. But that was never really seriously considered by most people. It was pretty mainstream, though, in China, to believe that the U.S. Army just laid down the coronavirus in Wuhan to sabotage China. That was a common belief in China for a bit there. And people forget this, because there are so many people in media, there are so many people, even in the YouTube space, that are Chinese apologists, that just do not care about what China does, and do not care about China's authoritarianism, or at least not enough. I mean, seriously, there are so many problems with the Chinese government. They are never ones to take responsibility for anything that happened to them. And to be clear, I don't believe necessarily that coronavirus was a biologically engineered disease. I don't really believe it came out of the Wuhan wet market, at least not directly either. I'm personally of the belief that, and I think the most reasonable story is that they were just doing experiments on bats with coronavirus in a Wuhan lab very close to the wet market, and were really terrible at safety precautions. I feel like that's the simplest and most obvious story for that to be the case. I mean, the wet market's obviously also fairly probable, but it's kind of suspect, especially considering that was the China-approved version of the story. So I don't think that's exactly what happened. Simply because of that, I'm prone to mistrusting China, as I'm sure everyone who's watched any of my videos for a long period of time already knows. But really, This is going to be their tact for the next year or so. I wouldn't be surprised if we keep seeing these sorts of stories coming out of China with them just trying to blame everyone else and obfuscating the story. And yeah, we have these stories of, well, the WHO is going to go in again and try to see if we can figure out what the origins of the coronavirus are in China. Well, here's the thing. If you didn't find it out last time, why exactly do you believe that the Chinese Communist Party is going to let you find out why it came into existence this time? Like a year after the fact. We are a year out, all right? And China has had plenty of time to burn any documents relating to this incident, if they have any. And I'm sure they did. I do not believe that they were just innocent and that they were just dumb about how they were covering this thing and that they were like, oh, rumor mongering because they were overzealous. I don't believe that. I really don't, especially not after all of the obfuscation they've been doing over the past year. I really do believe that they had something to do with this, and there was some kind of malfeasance in this, or some kind of gross incompetence. And I don't mean like, oh, they just forgot, or they were overzealous in one thing or another. No, I mean gross incompetence. I'm talking about, they saw it, they knew it was spreading to humans, and they were just like, meh. And they're just, meh. Yeah, and they just got killed. I wouldn't be surprised. I really wouldn't. And that's kind of a tame version of what may have happened. Really, it is. But that's not the end of our stories. We have one kind of dumb one. Kind of really dumb one. Peter Davidson. Hollywood, I guess New York elite, rips Staten Island anti-COVID-19 lockdown as people as babies on SNL. Jeez. It's really funny to see the sorts of authoritarian supporters, the people who support all of these authoritarian dictates and all of these completely ridiculous lockdown measures that even the WHO, the people who were originally sort of advocating for lockdowns, are now saying that people shouldn't do. It's funny to see all of these know-nothings, all of these people who are, for lack of a better term, sheeple. And I don't like that term, but for lack of a better term, they are sheeple. Just cry to the heavens, oh, they're babies because they don't want to have their freedoms violated. Oh, they're babies because they don't want to see their lives destroyed. How selfish. Not selfish. How stupid. How naive. And how just uncaring and unwilling to accept not only the reality of what the disease is and how little it affects people under the age of 70, and how detrimental and how absolutely destructive lockdowns are. How little do you need to know to say something like that? Seriously, how little do you need to think about the sort of people who are having their lives destroyed, who are falling into despair, who are killing themselves? How much you need to despise those people in order to say you don't deserve to be free? How much do you need to despise them? I'd say you'd have to despise them quite a bit. And it is extremely warming to see so many people just do that and just not care. Not care about people's freedom. Not care about all of the authoritarianism that is rampant throughout our society currently. And not care about whether this even goes away in the coming months because of a vaccine. I mean, they're already signaling it. Fauci has already said that even with a vaccine, you still need to mask up. You already have 70% of doctors, or I'd rather call them authoritarians, saying that they're just going to mask up for the rest of their lives in response to this. You already have all of that. People are going to... You think this is going to end with a vaccine? It isn't. It isn't going to end with a vaccine. They are already giving you exactly what their argument is going to be after the vaccine. They're already shopping it right now. They're already doing it. They're going to try and convince you to completely limit yourself for the next entirety of your life. People talk about the economic reset, the world reset, global reset, that sort of stuff. With Klaus Schwab and all that sort of stuff. That's a serious problem. I mean, and people talk about it as if it's a conspiracy theory. It isn't. People are saying this openly. The British royal family is advocating for it. And they're going to try and do it. It's not a conspiracy. Seriously, it's not even a conspiracy. They're just doing it. That's just what they're trying to do. And you need to fight back against it. You really do. Because when all is lost, when all civility is lost, when there's nothing else other than you and the other guy, and the other guy and you, when you both disagree with each other, on such a fundamental level, that one wants to see people be mostly unfettered in terms of their movement, their ability to do things, their ability to choose what they do with their lives, the ability to have what they have, right? To earn what they may earn. People, a right to their own labor. And you have people who say the exact opposite, who say you should own nothing. What are you supposed to do in that case, other than fight? There's no other option. You can't just sit back and say, well, I don't really want to ruffle any feathers. Because here's the thing, the feathers have already been ruffled. You're already on opposite sides of a paradigm. And I'm not saying volcanization. I'm not saying that we should split up or be in different countries. No. I'm saying fight. I'm saying look at the world around you. Look at what the future may bring. And look at what you may bring to the future. And fight. Because that's all you can do. Really, at this point, it's all you can do. And I'm not saying necessarily physically. But I'm saying that you should fight mentally. Fight philosophically. You can't sit back and watch. You can't. Yeah. And if there's anything I've taken away from this year in particular, as we sort of come into the end of the year and into the New Year's, I start thinking about what I want to do next year. What I've learned is that I can't sit back anymore. I can't sit around and say, well, other people will do it for me. Other people will fight for me. I can't do that anymore. And neither can you. No matter who you are, no matter where you are in your life, no matter what you're doing, you need to fight. You need to fight for what you believe in. Because that is the true purpose of life. If there's anything that you need to fight for, it is your purpose, it is your beliefs, it is your freedom. That is what you need to fight for. And that's where I'm going to leave you today. This has been Breaking on the Daily. I'm Kel Kidman, and I'm out.